Okay, welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host J.R. Stewart.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your co host, Tommy Duncan. It is Wednesday, May the 4th, 2022. And Jimmy, if it's Wednesday night,
Black Men Speak.
all right, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. We are very excited again to be here on Wednesday night. We have a fantastic show this evening. We have a fantastic speaker. And man, we're going to be talking about something that everyone of every ilk in life needs to know about and have more information on. And that is estate planning, Jimmy.
And before we jump in, Tom, let's give a big thanks to Liquid for providing our theme music. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel and spread the word as we're trying to grow this year. And we are streaming, Tom, on multiple sites this year. We're doing YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. So we may add another channel next week. We'll see.
All
So go
right,
ahead
that
and
sounds
introduce
good to us.
our guests and let's get into it.
All right, folks. Well, we have talked about this at a very high level on many of our shows in the past when we talk about building the Black economy, building wealth within the family. But, in the building of that economy and the creation of that wealth, you not only have to build it, but you have to preserve it. But one of the conversations that, we probably don't have enough in our households and in our communities is how to preserve that wealth, how to ensure that we have structures in place to propagate that wealth from generation to generation, what we call building intergenerational wealth. And so we're going to talk this evening a little bit about estate planning, why so many people, families, don't have a will, and quite frankly, what it may be costing their families, not just financially, but emotionally. So we have a special guest, Joseph Ferguson, who's going to be talking to us in this evening, and he is a professional in this area. Um, he's going to start off by telling us a little bit about himself, what he does, and how he got into doing what he does today, which is helping folks do this exact thing. But again, Jimmy, on Black Men Speak, we talk about serious issues. We're not about
That's right.
entertainment
We're
and
not for
amusement.
play.
Exactly. We're not for play.
To
We're
quote
about
Keisha
taking care of business.
Jones.
Absolutely. So what we'll do without further ado, Joseph, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do, and then we can get into the topic of the day.
All right, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. So, grew up in Kansas City. My father was an immigrant from Guyana, came to the States when he was 10. My mom grew up in South Oak Cliff. And after going to Kansas City, I went to college at Northwestern, played football there, ended up transferring to SMU. And then, of course, I thought I was going to the NFL. I was guaranteed in my mind. Ended up getting hurt and stopped playing. Then, as I was getting ready to graduate, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So, bought my LSAT book, started studying for the LSATs, thought I could be an attorney, and then got tired of school. And I was like, I'll just go look for a job. Interviewed a bunch of different companies, and then took a job at the firm I'm at now, just on a whim almost. I was like, oh, it seems like a good shot. I don't know much about it, but and then I fell in love with what I do. I was blessed that I fell into a career that I found a place where I can really help people and see the impact I can make in their lives and really make an impact in the overall community. So at this point, I've been doing it for 15 years. I run a boutique financial advisory practice. I'm a certified financial planner. I have my CLU and a bunch of other tests I've taken over the years. But the core of what I do is I help families and business owners create a strategic and intentional plan to build their wealth, grow it, and put themselves in a position to create generational wealth for their families. And I've kind of, over the past few years, been rethinking what I want the rest of my career to look like. Doing for 15 years now. I'll probably do this for another 25 or 30 years. And I'm thinking if in the next 25 or 30 years, I can find a way to impact 100,000 families, that's going to really start to make a significant dent in the wealth gap we have in Dallas and in the country as a whole.
Yes.
Yeah, I appreciate you providing that framework. And, we've talked a lot about the the black economy, Jimmy, historically, we've talked about the
Yes, we
huge
have.
gulf, the huge economic gulf between the black community and the mainstream community. When I say mainstream, I mean Caucasian community. And then, Jimmy, of course, we want to take it up another level. We look at the Asian community, which is the top of the
Correct.
food chain. When we look at average net income per household, with them being the most prolific entrepreneurs, I believe, right now in the United as a
Yes,
community.
they are.
I presume that with the work that you do as a financial planner, that you have access to studies, that you have access to information that talks about this gap between the economics of the black community and other communities. And we're not here for a history story about it, because we've had several conversations about how some of that may have happened structurally through the government, through so many other mechanisms. But if you look at where we are today, what do you see as the key issues that you found during your practice, during your experience working with the general community and working with our community, as to why we are still struggling? And then we're going to go from there into this whole conversation about preserving and protecting your wealth.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that I've seen personally and on why there's such a gap. Number one, or one big factor is just education and knowledge. Because if number one, we're never taught any of this stuff on finance in school. I can think of a ton of classes I've taken in high school and college that have no impact on my life today, from trigonometry to different things like that. But there was nothing given on basic finance or credit. And so that's an inhibitor. And if you don't come from a family that has money, then you're really not taught anything, because once you start to move up the food chain, then you feel necessary to impart that in your children because it's something that you learn over the way. And so 90% of people that I work with are the most successful of their family. They're the first generation to really have significant wealth. So that's where it becomes partly, I saw my parents spend everything they made to get by until they naturally have that, is that's the way I live my life, until you're able to start building habits to make a difference, because you want to really have wealth that's substantial and that you can be able to transfer to generations to come. And there's all kinds of different strategies that we can touch on lightly on how you can do that. And then, I mean, obviously there's the whole structural and systemic issue that is a whole nother rabbit hole that we could have a discussion on for days on end, on how that has an impact.
Gotcha. So, you made some very poignant statements, and a lot of folks perceive that, you have to be wealthy, you have to have all this money in order to have an estate plan. I mean, I think it should be hopefully common knowledge. Maybe you can debunk that mystery that everyone should have a will. It doesn't mean that you have to have a lot of money to have a will. But when you start talking about a will and an estate plan, and Jimmy, we can talk about this as well, because there are some famous people who have a lot of money who we found out when they deceased did not have a will. James
That's
Brown.
correct.
I think James Brown's estate is still in probate. We remember Prince, probably one of the most famous, but it's not just within our community. The former CEO of Zappos, Tony Say, I don't recall his last name. There was a
Yes.
lot of information when he ended up deceasing. I believe it was through a fire, that he did not have a will. So it's not just people who are everyday working Joes, but there are a lot of wealthy people who end up dying without a will.
And so, Tom, as you mentioned that, why don't we play a little game with our audience and see how many people you can name? Let's play our video clip.
Jimmy, please tell me it ain't so.
How many did you recognize, Tom?
I recognize all except for the brother who had the black headband around his head.
Nate
Everybody.
Dogg. He's a
Yeah.
rapper. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. I don't get into the most recent ones. Mine are all old school. So are you telling me that everyone that you had on that list did not have a will on the estate plan?
That's correct. And the winner seemed to have named all of them. So good for you on the chat line.
All right. All right. Bozie Scott, welcome. Welcome. Thanks. And for those of you who are out there, please join the chat. Please get in. Bonnie, good to have you. I don't see anyone out there right now, but also
The winner, someone named called the winner is just joined.
That would be Freddie Roberts.
Okay.
All right, Freddie. Thank you for joining us tonight. And it looks like you are the winner of naming the most folks. And by the way, folks, as we get into the conversation, do not feel afraid. Don't be scared, as they would say.
Jump in.
Yeah, the number is 972-497-2280, 972-497-2280 as we get into the conversation. So let's get back to the topic of the conversation. So it's not just everyday working people, but there are a lot of high net worth, or what we thought maybe were high net worth folks who don't have wills. So let's talk about the psychology. Matter of fact, why don't we start off with what an estate plan is and how do you compare that to a will? I presume we may have a few young people, millennials or Gen Z, who are either on the call right now or who are going to be listening to this call. Let's kind of set the foundation and talk about what it is, because we don't want to assume that our young people know what this stuff is.
Yeah, and I would say that in the most simplest terms, an estate plan is a plan to have your assets and your money go to the right people at the right time when you are no longer here. And there's a few different steps to it, to creating an estate plan. And the main steps are basically having a full inventory of what you own and what you owe. And then from there, you want to develop that actual plan to see where the dollars go and the different assets, whether it be a home, cars, different accounts. And then so you can make sure you provide for your children, any other dependents you have, and also be able to protect them against different creditors. Because if there's some things that you don't think about on an everyday basis, but if a person dies and they owe $500,000 or whatever the number is, and you give your child $500,000, they can go after the kid for the money that you owe them. But if you put that money in the trust, then the child owns nothing. And the debt collector has nothing to go after. He's the beneficiary of something, but he doesn't own anything. And so you can't recover that from them. And then make sure you protect your assets and document your wishes. And so I think there's a lot of nuanced things when it comes to estate planning. Everyone should have a basic will in place to at least have everyone know how you want things to go if you're no longer here. And if you go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yes, if you have children, I mean, it's extremely important that you have a guardianship for your children. Who do you want the kids to go to? Who do you want to make sure your kids are raised the way that you would raise them if you were here? And then it becomes even more complicated if you get into the fact you have a blended family where not there's second marriage or things like that. Because if you don't have a will in place, they go by what's called the intestate succession rules. And so it goes to probate and they decide what happens, which is I never want the government to tell me what to do with my kids or my money. So I'd have a will in place, and we can take it a step further. If you have a will in place, it's filed at the county courthouse.
So when you say probate, who is that? Local
Probate
government,
court.
county government, state government?
Local court. And so your will goes through probate. But that's public record. And so one thing that I tell my clients is, hey, listen, if you gave your kids whatever, $1 million and it's public record, what's going to happen? A lot of people are going to come out of the woodwork
Yes.
Yeah, hey, what's up, man? You got this money. Like, hey, I have this great idea. But so I mean, and I'm not an attorney, so it's not legal advice, but there are just some planning techniques, and I would urge you to sit down with a attorney to help you build one. But if you don't have, if in your will you basically say refer to the trust, everything flows to the trust document that no one can see.
So
Got it.
so two things. And because I'm asking a question, I'm thinking if I have any
Yeah.
question, somebody else. When you say probate court, what level is that? Is that county? Is that state? What is that? We can explain for our listeners, especially younger people who are, maybe hearing this for the first time.
Yeah, it's the local court, county court system that they probate the wills.
Okay. Now, if you have a will, does that mean that your estate isn't going to probate?
Yeah, if you have a will, that means your state it doesn't go to probate.
Okay. So everything is laid out in your will. There is no need or requirement for it to go to probate.
It's the formal process it goes through to recognize the will, but then it says in the will what's going to happen. So the will be probated, if you will, but the will tell the court how things go, and the court says, "Yeah, check the box. That's right. We're good to go." But if you don't have a will, then there's another thing called interstate succession rules, and they differ by state. And so that's where you have less control over what happens. You have no control because you're no longer here.
No control. Yes.
Yeah.
And the
Gotcha.
other thing is that your will could get challenged by one of your heirs, and if
Yep.
it's tossed out, now you're back into the probate court to try to decide and figure out who gets what.
Yep. And
And I can
one
tell
of the
you, the
other things,
lawyers end up with most of it in the end.
and they cost money. And one of the things
Costs
that
money.
people don't realize is that the title of your beneficiaries on your retirement accounts, on your insurance, supersedes what the will says. So the will can say, I want this to go to so-and-so, but it's titled, and that's a legal document. So that money's going to whoever the beneficiary is on the form. And it's important to update those beneficiaries on a periodic basis, whether it's parents that are no longer with you or an ex-wife or something. So you got to make sure you're updating and have someone that's going to hold you accountable for that throughout.
Now, that's very good advice. I didn't know
Okay, so
that.
we just had Bonnie said, repeat that, please. So could you repeat just maybe the last part of what you said?
I think so. How a insurance policy, a retirement account, how a beneficiary is titled on record with whatever companies it's with, that's going to supersede what the will says. So if your will says, "Hey, I want all my stuff to go to my children," but on the insurance company you have your ex-wife as the beneficiary, the money goes to the ex-wife, and they can take it to court, but legally that's her money.
The insurance money, or just from that
Yeah,
document.
whatever was on the insurance retirement account, whatever has the beneficiary says, that's their money.
Gotcha. Now you said something a little bit earlier that I'm going to go back to, and you said everybody should have a will. So let's say I'm 22, 23 years old. I'm just, getting out of school, building a foundation. I'm not married. I don't have kids, or maybe I do have a couple of kids, but I'm just starting out in life. I don't really have any money. I don't have really much to speak of. Should I have a will, and why? And maybe the better question is, how young or old should I be to have a need for a will? What are those factors that, let's say, a millennial or a Gen Z should be looking at to say, hey, I actually need a will?
So not only is in the estate plan, the will is a portion of it. That's not the whole thing, because then you also want to have your medical directives, your power of attorney in there. And so one thing that I think in the estate plan is, well, if something happens to you and you're a vegetable, what do you want to happen? Or if you can't make decisions for yourself, who are you going to delegate those medical decisions to? That would
Okay.
be, that's
So
not a
let me
common
get that
thing.
confused. please discriminate between or discern what is the medical directive doing, and then what is the power of attorney. And I think you spoke to both of those just to make sure that people understand
Yeah.
which and what.
Yeah, so you can have a healthcare power of attorney or a like financial power of attorney, and so that means that person has the legal authority to make decisions on your behalf in the event that you cannot make decisions because of some sort of incapacity, whether it be coma, whether it can be whatever can happen in that scenario. And then the
So if you
medical,
are so if you're incapacitated, let's say if you're in a coma, then that would be a healthcare power of attorney.
yeah,
Okay.
to make the decisions for the what health decisions that you would make if you were here, if you could choose.
All right. And you mentioned is there a regular power of attorney? Is that
A
different than a
financial power of
healthcare
attorney
power?
that's over your assets to have power over what to do with the money, if you will, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole that a lot of people, especially athletes, get in trouble signing over financial power of attorney to other people, and they go out and do things with their money that is illegal. And there's one that's happened recently with Richard Jefferson. He was just talking about the other day. He signed some power of attorney, or the guy forged it, and then was taking out loans in his name. So there's a lot of different things you got to be aware of when you're dealing with it.
Okay. And I heard there was something recent, not so good news about Kevin Garnett as well, correct?
I didn't hear what happened with Kevin Garnett.
Well, let's say a lot. From what I heard, a lot of his money just left his. I don't want to say his estate, but someone did something funky with his money. So, medical directive. How is that different than a healthcare power of attorney, or are they the same?
They're closely linked, and the medical directive, and this is not my specific area of expertise, so I believe, so don't quote me on this, the medical directive is more of if you keep the, what do you call it, if you pull the plug or not, basically.
Okay, got you.
Yeah,
Got you.
I think that's what it is, and I'll confirm that, and I have some stuff I can send out that has more stuff in detail on
No
that.
problem. We do have a text from one of our guests. Can you leave a company in a trust? You talked about a trust a little bit.
Again, this is I refer to attorney, but you can leave a company in a trust, but it doesn't really do that much in terms of protection standpoint, because the trust is just a box.
Okay.
And I'd want to clarify: are you talking about put a company in a trust now, or leave the company you own to your heirs in a trust? If that's the case, then you can leave it in the trust and then have a trustee who can make decisions on the trust behalf.
Correct. So let's say if you have someone who's owned a business for a while and they want to put the trust in this container, so to speak, and then let's say at some point in time they decide to retire, or let's say that they decease or whatever the case is, and then they give control of that trust to their heir. Maybe that's a son or a daughter or something of that nature.
Yeah, and so with the trust, there's a couple of components I think that are important. So you put it in the trust, and then you have the trustee who has a fiduciary responsibility to oversee the management of what's in what held in the trust, and then you have the beneficiaries of the trust. So your heirs would likely be the beneficiary, and then the trustee would oversee the management of the trust.
Okay.
And there are some countries where they don't allow direct ownership by foreigners. So you have to put a business or a property in a trust in order to have it. So, I mean, that happens quite frequently, especially like for shares. If you don't trust your kids to manage your company and you have a bulk of stocks out there, you may want to have a trust, a trustee to oversee that and simply pay out to the heirs how you want to distribute the dividends of those shares, rather than give them direct control of it.
So I don't forget and go back to this. How young? I mean, or at what age should you seriously think about putting together a will or an estate plan? And I know that's going to depend on the person's circumstances, but let's just say, the majority of kids coming out of college, oh, I can do that in my 40s, late 30s, or when I get married and have kids. Is that reasonable?
So I don't think it's. I think it's vitally important to have a will and a correct an overall estate plan if you have anyone dependent upon you. That's
So if you
when
have a child,
if you have a child, without a doubt, because you want to make sure you have the correct guardianship for your children if something happens when you're unexpected, and that they're taken care of while you're no longer here. Or if you have a parent that's dependent upon you from a financial standpoint, and somebody, we may get interrupted because I hear my little one screaming. And like a parent or relative that relies on you for care, then you absolutely must have that in place, because if something happens without it in place, it's a disaster.
When you say
Can I
go
offer a
ahead.
different? Yeah, I want to kind of add to that. What do you think about someone doing it as early as possible, even though they don't have very much? But people think I need to generate some wealth first and then protect it. But if you have a plan in place to protect your wealth when you don't have it, maybe that would encourage you to go get the wealth while you're young, rather than waiting until you think you blow up or you have something to protect. Would that be a strategy of like a poor person coming out of school, put these things in place? They understand how much they want to build up, and they have a plan for how much they're going to set aside and how they're going to build up wealth, so that way they have something to protect. But it also gives them a plan for life on how to build wealth. Put some structure in place for them, rather than just going through life saying, "Oh, when I'm 40 or 45, I hope to have some money, then I'll protect it."
Yeah, I mean, I think it's never a bad thing to have it in place. Like, I would never tell someone that says, "Hey, what do you think about this?" I'm like, "Yeah, like get a basic will in place. It's not that expensive. You can
Right.
go on. I wouldn't recommend, but you can go online and just get a basic will done online for really
Are you
inexpensive."
saying legal zoom is junk?
I didn't say that. I'm saying I would not do that for myself,
Okay.
and I would not recommend that for my clients. But if the only thing is to have something in place, I mean, you can legally write a will by hand and just write it out and have it in a safe place to say what you want to happen, and that'll stand up in court.
So what you're saying is something is better than nothing.
Exactly.
So let's get to another core question here. You worked with a lot of people over time. Why do so many people not have a will?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, I think it's one of the things that's just not fun to talk about. It's not exciting. People tend to kick the can down the road. Oh yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that. There's other things that become a bigger priority in their lives, and they never address it. And some people just don't think it'll happen. They just are in that belief. Um, I'm I'm fine. It's not gonna happen anytime soon, so I'll do it later. So I think that's the biggest reason that I've seen, at least.
Gotcha. And so we have another comment from one of my guests. It can be very emotional and difficult to do. I'm looking at two things, and there may be other things. Some people may have a fear of going through that process because it probably forces them to answer some very difficult questions and the potential cost, because they think, hey man, this whole will or the estate plan thing can get pretty expensive, and I don't have a lot of money. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I remember when we did our last time we updated ours with my wife, and it's a when you do the whole thing, it's a lot. It's emotional when you're thinking about, if I'm not here, who takes care of my kids? Like, that's not a fun thing to think about.
Right.
And so I mean, it is emotional. I mean, I think it's powerful to go through it. I saw a question and I say, is the online better than nothing? And I would say, yes, something is going to be better than nothing. I mean, it is an emotional process, but I also think it helps keep you more grounded. because you think about what really matters then when you're going through a process like that, and that'll be a way to keep the important things at the forefront of your mind
Right.
versus just putting my head in the sand and everything's going to be okay. There's no, we got to address things because we know things go wrong. We've all
Well,
seen it.
well, not only
Right.
who's going to care for your kids, but it may force you to go out and get insurance to make sure
Yeah.
your kids are protected. So, like I said, having something in place may force your hand because it gives you something to think about, as opposed to having nothing and just winging it. And
Hey,
you're right.
Jimmy.
We've all seen situations where someone's passed away with no plan for their kids.
And Jimmy, by the way, it looks like our logo is covering up the very top part of the text responses. So just the FYI, I don't know if that's something you can remove, but it is
Let
in
me
the
see.
upper
I'll
right-hand
check.
corner. Okay. It's the logo and it's in the upper right. So it covers up part of the first text at the very top. So let's keep moving forward. And I appreciate your feedback on this. So in your opinion, Joseph, there's not a particular income level or asset base that you would recommend or that you need to be at before you seriously think about it. One, if you have a dependent, whether it's a child, whether it's a parent, whether it's someone who's just dependent on you in any way for their caring, you need a will. But in terms of someone who may not have dependents, let's say someone who's out of college, they don't have children yet, they don't have a family yet, they don't make a ton of money, when should they think about getting a will if they're not in that situation? Can they just wait until whenever, or should they wait?
You don't. There's no perfect answer, in my opinion. Hi, buddy. I love you. Little one's going to bed. There's no perfect opinion, perfect answer, in my opinion, to when's the right time. Because if you're single, you have no dependents, you don't really have that many assets. You don't. If something happens tomorrow to you, is not that much harm done. If it's on your mind and you're thinking about it, do it. Because why put off tomorrow what you can do today?
Right.
I have a friend of mine who dabbles a lot in finance. He's not a certified financial planner, but he works with a lot of people and helping them with their finance. And he had a friend of his or an associate. She was, relatively healthy from what he thought, but she was, I think, in her early 50s, and she, I believe, had saved quite a bit. She had a 401k. She may have had real estate, maybe not, and she just suddenly had a heart attack and died. And she had no will or estate plan in place. She didn't have children, and she wasn't married. But the situation was she still had living family. And so at that time, unfortunately, she had nothing in place to provide any directives as to what should happen. And I don't know the person personally, but he said, yeah, it can be pretty tough, especially if something happens unexpectedly, even though you don't have children or parents who are dependent on you financially. It can still be a little bit taxing, emotional, stressful for your family.
Yeah, definitely. Because if you don't, because I think it goes back to like the biggest part of estate planning is making sure that your money goes to who you want it to at the right time. And if you have nothing in place, you don't have control. And it creates a lot of chaos because then it creates infighting with relatives or we should get this or they should get that. And so it's just much more strategic just to have it all in writing. And I can send out this little article that talks about the different steps of creating a state plan and kind of walks you through some different ideas you can be thinking about.
Gotcha. Okay. How
And
much? Let's kind of get to one of these things that may prevent some people from investing the time and the energy into a will or an estate plan, whether they write one out or they go to a professional such as yourself. How much, or is there a reasonable range depending on your asset base? What can these things cost when you talk about a will and estate plan? I'm pretty sure that's probably one of the key things that prevents some people from actually taking the time to do a will or putting together a more comprehensive estate plan.
That's it's a wide range because you could be
Yeah.
anywhere from a few $100s to thousands upon thousands, depending on the complexity of it.
Okay.
And so, and because I mean, you could write one by hand for free, which is going to be better than nothing. But if you want it professionally done, then it's going to cost something. And
Right.
depending on the complexity of it, then the cost goes up. I think that one of the things that is, and you mentioned it before, is that like within this whole estate plan, if there's no insurance to funnel some sort of capital in, is problematic. And capital is not the only thing you want to leave, but it's vital to creating wealth for your family and for generations to come.
Okay. Good deal. And you talk about the cost of putting together an estate plan. I mean, whether you're just a working Joe or a working Jane, but it's almost like this conversation when it comes to education. I remember seeing this commercial years and years ago. If you think education is expensive, try the cost of ignorance. Let's talk about the cost of not having something like this in place, what this could potentially cost you. I know we had the reel a little bit earlier that showed some pretty wealthy people, but let's not talk about wealthy people. Let's just talk about everyday working people who have something, not taking the time to do this, and God forbid something happens. What have you seen? What are the potential risks in avoiding this that people need to understand, and how it impacts their families?
Yeah, it could be endless. I mean, the risks are everywhere from creating situations where your family don't even speak to each other anymore because they fought about what was left behind and now they're estranged from one another because there's no clear plan on what your intention was and each one thought they knew better and they create fights. I mean, you can lose basically whatever wealth is left behind due to creditors if the estate plan wasn't done right. And
Talk,
so
talk,
there's
talk about that in a little bit more when you say you can lose everything to creditors.
so if, for example, you left some money behind, but there's also some different debts that you had out there, or you left your money to your heirs, even though you didn't have any debt, that person had a bunch of debt, and the creditors can then go after the money that you left to your heirs because now it's their asset that they own because you gave it to them, but they had this debt they hadn't paid. So now your money's just gone right to the creditor. And instead of being protected because it was strategic in how you built the estate plan out.
Okay, that makes sense. And again, for our listeners, our friends, or as Malcolm would say, our friends and enemies who are out there who have questions on this, continue to ask questions on the chat line. Of course, you're more than open to call in if you have any questions. From Brother Ferguson, 972-497-2280. We have about 20 minutes, give or take, left. We definitely have a few more questions that we want to address. But this is for our listeners. And, really this is for our community. And that is why we do this. And that is to share information that is going to benefit our community tangibly on a day-to-day basis. You set up trusts, correct?
I don't personally, that's a legal document that attorney would
Okay.
set up. Our team, we manage and invest the dollars in the trust for families and things like that. And so was there a question or?
Not a question from the chat line, but I'm curious. And if I'm curious, I'm pretty sure there's some other folks that are curious. At what point should you seriously consider setting up a trust as opposed to just a will, a medical directive, etc.?
I would say if you're setting up a will, you might as well set up at least a testamentary trust, which is going to be a trust that's created upon your death. And I see a question came in that money will flow to. So upon your death, a trust is created that those dollars go into.
What are the tax implications there?
On the
trust, if you set up a trust, you're putting some of your assets in it. What difference does it make putting it in a trust versus everything being under your name and using a trust when something does happen?
So the tax implication for most individuals is not going to change because the only time the true tax implications comes if you're above the estate tax exemption line number, which right now is 11.5 roughly million per individual. So 22 million per couple, 23-ish. So the implications from a tax standpoint aren't going to be different in putting the money into the trust. From a protection standpoint, if you put into irrevocable trust, if it's outside of your name and your reach, then it cannot be accessed by anyone else.
So when you say that, are you saying who can they attack in that case when they're looking for pockets?
If you're the beneficiary of a trust, they can't attack you if it's not your trust. But if I put all my money into a trust that I have complete control over, then then they can still go after that because it's not like I've put myself at arm's length away from it. It's just a box, and courts will tear that apart for the most part. And again, I preface I'm not an attorney. I just have dealt with this a lot with clients in my field. And yeah, the insurance. So the insurance payouts may be subject to the estate tax depending on amount. Yeah, that's if you own it in your own estate, then it is. Typically, what you would do is you would put the money into the insurance policy into an irrevocable life insurance trust. It's called an ILIT for short. That way, it's outside of your estate and not subject to the estate tax that the IRS will come out.
Right. And the original question here is, what are your thoughts on term life insurance if you have adult children?
It's all dependent on the situation. I mean, term insurance, less than 3% of term policies ever pay out because you either outlive the term and that's how it's designed. It's just for those very, very rare cases where you fall dead at a young age. And then after the term's over, you got to go out and apply when you're older and less healthy. And
pay more.
Excuse me?
And pay more.
Well, you pay more at the time, but you also pay more for whole life insurance, correct?
Yeah, but term insurance it's great to have because it's inexpensive but you're renting the coverage.
Gotcha.
And just like when you rent an apartment, when your lease is up, you don't take anything with you. Landlord keeps all the money, all the rent you paid, and then you got to go out and pay more for another place when rates have gone up. If you own it, you pay more, but in a version of whole life or some version of permanent insurance, you build equity inside that policy in the form of cash or cash value. And you can use that cash value to do whatever you want with. You can touch it before retirement. You can use it to invest in real estate, which a lot of clients have done. And it just becomes another asset and a forced way of building wealth. And you know that no matter what happens, your heirs are going to get the insurance proceeds because you own the policy and you're going to have it for the rest of your life.
Gotcha. And just so our listeners are clear again, when they're considering, or if they're considering whether they are a business owner, entrepreneur, or whether they work in corporate America or something of that nature, the primary reasons for setting up a trust and how it protects you, again, is what, just to make sure we're crystal clear?
So, it depends on what type of trust there is, because trust is just it's a very broad term. There's a lot of different trusts that you can set up. But a trust is basically an entity or a box that you can put things in that's not in your name. So you can put your home in a trust, you can put a business trust, but then you can get down to all these different complex trusts that you have. So, that's a difficult part for me to simplify.
Let's say if I'm I'm working, I'm not a entrepreneur. I don't have my own businesses, but let's say I work, I have a job, I have a family, and I want to put my assets in a trust, whether that's my home and or other assets in a trust. And so it's a legal person, right?
Yeah.
It's not you, but it's a legal person. What is the benefit of me doing that putting certain of my assets in a trust? It protects my family from what situation?
So number one, it protects it's not in your name. And so if
Correct.
somebody's looking for assets or they're litigious, as we are people are in society today, they want to sue and you own a lot of things and they can find a reason to come after you for certain things. And people do it for a protection standpoint, just so it's out at arm's length.
Gotcha. Okay. So when we're going to go back through, we're about 10 minutes out. If we look at a estate plan, most people understand what the will is. You talked about a couple of other things, and I'm assuming if there was a check off list, unless you have a very complicated situation, if you're putting together a estate plan that would probably fit most people's needs, obviously you need to consult with a professional if you have a complex situation, a lot of businesses, real estate, and other things. What does that look like other than a will? You mentioned earlier a medical directive, a healthcare power of attorney, 2, 3, 5 different. What does that look like?
I think every situation is different, but the guardianship is really important.
What document is that called then?
It's just a guardianship document, like within the overall plan, is where you declare who is the guardian of your children, or if you have adult parents that need care. And you need to make sure you have an inventory of everything that you own and everything that you owe and where you want it to go.
Now, this may sound like a very simple question. Once you do this, what needs to happen? And when I say what needs to happen, where do typically people store this? Who needs to know that? And that's another conversation. In addition to having the conversation with yourself, with your spouse, with your husband or wife, spouse, or whomever it is, as to who we want to have what. God forbid something happens. What happens next? Because I presume you can have this stuff, something happens, nobody knows where it is.
Yeah. That's a question that's is really family dependent, and it gets a little hairy depending on who you discuss that with. But you should have somebody that is your trusted confidant, typically the person that you're going to rely on to take care of things if you're not here. They should know where things are. Somebody should know where things are.
Gotcha.
And it's a different person for everybody.
Okay, that makes sense. We have a question from one of our listeners. Is I set my will a long time ago using prepaid leave, which was not that expensive. My question is, how often should a person think about updating their will if there isn't a change in the family size, which means they don't have more children?
I would at least look at it every few years and make sure that the names are right, because every situation is different. And I'll use myself as an example. As of now, my wife and I have my parents as the guardians of our children. But my dad's almost 70. So every year we got to say, hey, listen, like, is that still right? Like, as he gets older and older, because that becomes hairy. And so there's a ton of different situations. And so I would defer to meeting with a legal attorney or having a real in-depth discussion with a true planner to better advise you on that.
Okay, that's great. And that's why you go to folks like yourself
Yeah.
to have these conversations.
Well, not just have the conversation, Tom, but I would suggest have a relationship with your professionals, your banker, your lawyer, your accountant, because when your situation changes in life, life is very fluid. So you need someone that you can talk to at any given moment about where you are in life and make sure you have the proper things in place to protect you.
Agreed. Agreed. When you go through this process, what are the most typical overlooked things or oversights that people make when you have these consultations with them? Things that they just don't think about.
Just the amount of insurance they have for what they want to accomplish
Okay.
is one thing that often comes up. And then if something happened tomorrow, the way things would actually happen are not the way they would want them to happen because they haven't done the proper planning. And once that light bulb goes off, they're like, whoa, I got to do something, because if I wasn't here, none of this stuff would be the right way based on how things are set up today.
Okay. Good deal. Jimmy, you have any thoughts or questions? I think we're probably about almost 5 minutes in, and this time has gone extremely fast, which I figured was going to happen.
No, I'm good. Brother Ferguson has covered a lot, and I've actually learned a few things.
What? Not you?
Yeah, yes, me. You know, even
That doesn't
Mr.
happen.
Know-it-all,
Okay,
I've learned a few things tonight. So I
so
appreciate all the information Mr. Ferguson has provided.
yeah, brother, I'm gonna have to give you your kudos, because when Jimmy said he's learned something, you've done something. Why don't we do this before we close out? For those who are listening now, for those who may be listening later, they want to have a conversation, build a relationship with you, talk through some of the things that we've discussed tonight. It's like, you know what? I'm exposed, and I need to talk to someone who's a professional who I can build a relationship and build trust with. How do they contact with you? What is the best way for them to get in contact with you, and or what should they do?
Yeah, I can leave my email and my office number down, and we can have schedule time with somebody on my team to have a discussion and figure out how we can be of value.
Okay, that
And
sounds great.
plus, people, now's the time to call when it's free. At 9 o'clock, you'll be on the clock.
Right. So we want to thank you again, Joseph. This is your first time. Hopefully, it will not be the last time that we'll be visiting, because we just cannot have enough of these conversations when it comes to building wealth, protecting wealth, and then scaling it throughout our communities to expand our economy. Because, without economics in this particular country, you have no power. And so
Yep.
these are just some of the tools that we want to share with our listeners so that we can overcome what I would consider to be some of the more traditional hurdles that we've had to be able to make the best decisions for our families.
Well, and plus, as we build wealth, Tom, we can't turn around and lose it. So we need professionals like Brother Ferguson to help us hold on to it so we can catch up with other groups.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that I've learned in my time doing this is like everybody talks about generational wealth and like leaving things behind. And I've realized there's really 5 different types of capital that you can leave behind.
Okay.
And I mean, you have spiritual capital, which is of the utmost importance. You're going to obviously have financial capital. Then you have social capital, intellectual capital, and human capital. And the thing that people miss is that they think that, oh, if I leave financial capital, everything's going to be okay. That's not true. If you've not done the right things on the other areas, that financial capital is gone.
Right.
On average, in the African American household, the inheritance is split within 17 days of receiving it.
17.
Wait, back up.
17 days.
Please tell me it ain't so.
It is.
17 days?
17
That's
days.
it?
Yep.
Where?
That's
Where
not even a good month.
where does the money go in 17 days?
On rims,
Usually has
cars,
4
girls.
wheels, and they get it from the dealership. That's usually what happens.
So somebody buys a car and that's the entire inheritance.
Yeah, it's 17 days. It's sad.
All right, just so we can be very clear, financial capital is probably the easiest to understand. Intellectual capital is what you know. Social capital, I would presume, means who you know. So what does the human capital mean? And talk a little bit about spiritual capital, then we'll close out.
Yeah, so I think the social capital, one thing is, so you think about a family like the Kennedys. They haven't made any money in years, but they've always been the who's who of everything because they have the Kennedy Foundation, which has to give out money each year towards different philanthropic things. So every year they're the who's who of the town. Everyone that has a charity foundation wants them. They're never going to have a problem getting a job. They're never going to have a problem going to the best places because everybody knows that they have to give out X amount of dollars per year. And so it's a really unique way of creating social capital for your kids that they'll never need or want for anything because everyone's going to be coming to them. They have to give whatever the number amount is away each year. And so that's going to just further advance them in what they're trying to accomplish.
So when you talk about social capital, you're talking more about reputation, not your network per se.
A little bit of both.
Okay.
I think it falls in line because, I mean, who you know is going to, I mean, it's not what you know, it's who you know. We know that's very important. And so your reputation, your relationships, and being and how it precedes you is going to be carried so long.
When you talk about human capital, what is that?
Just your ability to do things as a human. And I think in recognizing that,
Is
and
that
then obviously
when you say your ability to do things, are you talking about health or are you talking about something else?
the whole thing, I mean, your health, your overall well-being.
Gotcha. And the last one, probably the most important, spiritual capital. That could probably mean many things to many people, but what does that mean to you when you say
To me, it remains my relationship with Christ and trying to live out everything that God put in me and inspire others to do the same. It's like the story of the 10 talents, that people bury their talents, and in the Bible. I know we're running against time, but I try to live a life that is Christ-like and that my children will see and follow and admire to aspire to be. And I obviously fall short every day, like all of us do.
We
but
all do, yes.
yeah, but I keep trying to keep getting better and keep living the life that I'm called to be.
All right. Well, with that being said, we are right almost at the top of the hour. Jimmy, you have any closing comments before we close out this fantastic show?
No, I'm good. Just wish our brother Ferguson would consider coming back again in the future.
Yeah, I'm open to it. I'm always excited to spend time with you guys and do what I can to make a difference in this world.
Good deal. All right, Jimmy, do we have time to close out with a brief word of prayer?
Yes, go ahead, sir. Always time for prayer.
All right, good deal. We'll bow our heads in reverence. Dear Father God, we come before you this evening thanking you for bringing us back together, Father. We thank you for bringing Brother Ferguson to our listeners tonight. We thank you for this platform. We thank you for the words that you have shared through him this evening. Father, we thank you for the relationship that you have developed with Brother Ferguson that has inspired him to do a great work in our communities, to impact our great nation, Father. We thank you to continue to bring us together, Father, as purveyors of knowledge, as purveyors of truth. Father, continue to bless us with the inspiration to stay focused on your work so that your will may be done on earth as it is in heaven, Father. We thank you. We praise you. We ask you would continue to bless our families. We ask that you would continue to bless our great nation and to keep us focused on your word. In your precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.